As the season is turning, I found myself wanting to get back in the kitchen to do some culinary history. You may have not noticed, but it's been a while since my last video. I've been wanting to do a Newfoundland food history video since my trip there last summer, and was recently inspired by the Terra Arcana podcast project, which gave me the little magical nudge I needed, and more on that later in the video. Today I'm hoping to take you on a culinary journey to Newfoundland by sharing a bit of folklore and diving into the history of the Touton. I had Toutons a few times when I visited Newfoundland. One of the traditional ways to serve it features some drizzled molasses, but I've also tried pork Toutons and butter chicken Toutons. And unlike a lot of the historic recipes I've studied on my channel that feel somewhat relegated to the past, this baking tradition is alive and well. The earliest reference I've found to Toutons is from 1805, cited in the Dictionary of Newfoundland English, which describes it as a donut, whereas a later 1839 description calls it a flapjack or kind of cake made with bread dough. Other descriptions from the 1890s mention frying the dough in animal fat, that they were a breakfast or dinner bread, that sometimes fatback pork cubes were mixed into the dough before being fried, that they were to be fried until golden brown, that the dough rose overnight because of slow rising yeast, and as a result were fried fresh in the morning, that they are traditional food of the woodsman because they contained pork and didn't freeze like other foods, and that they were sometimes served with molasses. Throughout the 19th century, despite some variations, the main concept of a Touton remains fairly consistent: fried bread dough, and sometimes fried leftover bread dough. The recipe I'm using today comes from the Traditional Newfoundland Kitchen by Roger Pickavance. He collected over 300 recipes from around Newfoundland by interviewing and cooking with the participants in this culinary history project, particularly cooks who grew up before the Second World War. The cookbook represents what he considers Newfoundland's most traditional foods based on a variety of factors like recipe historicity, local flavors, agricultural technology, increased globalization, and major political influences in the 20th century. In addition to this brief snapshot of Touton history, I also wanted to continue the bread and folklore thread I touched on in episode 10 of The Backwoods Kitchen. In Newfoundland, bread was sometimes seen as a protection against the Fae, who were typically up to no good, though sometimes helpful. I'll not brush them aside entirely. One belief says the Fae, quote, were the angels that stayed neutral in the great celestial battle when the Archangel Michael fought Lucifer for control of heaven, end quote, and though exiled still maintained some supernatural powers. Those who fell on land became fairies, and those who fell in the sea became mermaids. Any long journey across forests or bogs required some type of protection against these supernatural beings, typically taking the form of carrying a bit of bread in your pocket. Bread appears in changeling mythology, as a piece kept in the swaddle or the crib would prevent the Fae from switching the human child for one of theirs. Another story recounts a, quote, man going into the woods with a sandwich, being lost and taken by fairies, and then coming back out but having his sandwich burned for safety's sake. The food was tainted by association, end quote. Why bread, though? In the article, Bread, Berries, and Fish, Food and Fairy Encounters in Newfoundland, by author Karin Murray-Bergquist, notes that bread is the most frequently cited food item in relation to fairy folklore. Bread represents humanity, a food item made with ingredients processed by human hands rather than taken directly from the wild. As a staple food in many cultures, it, quote, makes its way into every aspect of society, both physically, as something present at every meal and baked within the home, and symbolically as part of the Eucharist. It was as well present in proverbs related to pathfinding and avoiding getting lost. You're eating your path was an often heard admonition to those consuming bread in the woods, implying that the bread is less for sustenance than for symbolism, end quote. While your bread dough rises, please enjoy my interpretation of the fairy encounter. Since we're talking about folklore, I also wanted to share a great project from Newfoundland, the Terra Arcana podcast. The story takes place in a secret magical library in downtown St. John's, Newfoundland, where the librarians are guardians not just of ancient lore, but also of arcane powers. Whether they're called on to confront mischievous fairies, angry mermaids, a ghost ship, a sea monster, or talking statues in a city park, head librarian Kate and her eager apprentice Essie have what it takes to face off against mythological foes and paranormal problems. Drawing deeply on Newfoundland folklore in a contemporary urban setting, Terra Arcana is written and produced by Trudy Morgan Cole and Emma Cole, a mother-daughter duo of writers. Trudy and Emma have spent 2 years, in between other projects, writing the scripts for Terra Arcana, and they're now crowdfunding through Kickstarter to raise money to pay voice actors and an audio technician to create a professional-sounding podcast that will invite listeners into the magical world of Terra Arcana. They hope to launch the podcast in early 2026. So I hope this project has piqued your interest, and I wanted to give them a shout out. As you know, on this channel I love supporting other Canadian content, history, and folklore alike. The details to the Kickstarter are included in the description box below. As we hurtle ever nearer to Samhain and the thinning of the veil, consider carrying some bread on you this fall season for ultimate protection against the Fae. Now that you're armed with a brand new bread recipe to try, you'll also be prepared to listen to the first episode, all about fairies. But you didn't hear that from me, you heard it from them.